Welcome to This Weekend Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the This Weekend Coworking podcast feed. This is your weekly recap for week 20. I am Hector Kolonas, and I'm joined today by Will from Yardi. Will, how are you?
Great, mate. Yourself?
Great. I'm not that great, to be honest. I just caught a flu, and I was going to reschedule, but I wanted people who are watching to know that I'm not an AI agent, and I do get sick. I'm going to power through, so apologies for any sneezes or coughs. I'll try my best to get that all edited out. So we got a very action-packed newsletter. I think there was 30-ish stories that we sent out this week. We're going to dig into a big conversation around whether Airbnb is finally going to be the Airbnb for co-working spaces, whether virtual offices are actually profitable, look at this idea of a platform operating system, discuss a little bit about whether we should have a rating system, and then dig into some headlines from across the world. Will, are you ready to do this?
Let's do it.
All right, but before we do, Yardi and Yardi Cube are the sponsor of this week's newsletter. You guys put a pretty bold statement into the newsletter telling operators that they can make better, smarter leads through what you're doing. So I'm going to hand it over to you. What are you doing to generate better, smarter leads for co-working spaces?
Yeah, awesome. And thanks for having us. So I think last time that we spoke was when, on recorded camera, was when we announced the DeskPass acquisition, as well as Hubble in the UK. So I think that was the start of us really making a meaningful investment in marketplace capabilities, meaning that we really want to add to the top line of our co-working customers. In the industry in general, there's a lot of really smart people that we love working with that you've had on the podcast that are really focused on top of funnel operational efficiency and lead generation. Really important at this point in the market as the market's getting so fractured as it grows and more niche. So, there's more solution providers entering the space. We're obviously a consolidator when it comes to that, bringing these solutions into our core product. So it's a really important part for us to build. We really think about the way we build in kind of three big areas. There's our core operating systems, there's our accounting systems, and then there's everything top of funnel. And we haven't really been loud in the last couple of years on what we do at the top of funnel. So it's an area we want to have an outsized voice and an outsized impact for our customers moving forward. I would say, to be pragmatic and give you an actual answer to your question, there's 4 real areas where we want to build. One of those is networks. That's the ability for operators to extend their members' reach to third-party spaces via their native channels, and for other co-working users who might be native members of other operators to get into their space. We want people to be able to connect so that co-working users can use co-working space where and when they want it. So that's a big one, and we're building that on the back end, and acquisitions like Hubble DeskPass play a big role in that. The second theme that we're building towards is the convergence of e-commerce and CRM. I think that's been quite fractured in the co-working space. Every operator knows that getting their data all the way from first impression through to a sale can be difficult in this space. So we really want to help people through customer portals, e-commerce, aggregator data to make sure that they can follow that experience and help convert it. The third one is private suites. And this is where our relationship with Hubble plays a big role. We know that there is a chasm between traditional leasing and on-demand booking of space. We're getting pretty good at on-demand booking of space with apps and websites and e-commerce. The traditional broker industry, which I know we're going to talk about here in a bit, is really good at traditional leasing. But that private suite, which makes up sometimes north of 90% of our co-working operators' revenue, not optimized yet. So we really want to work on that. And one thing that we're really excited to announce is that the Hubble listing network and private suite search experience, which has been so successful in London and the UK, is going to be coming to New York this summer. We are bringing that to the next big market, and we really want to start changing that experience. And we're working with the biggest landlords from our commercial side that have spec suite and small office programs, as well as our co-working partners, to get that up and running. So you're going to hear a lot more from that this summer.
Well, I'm just going to stop you quickly. I just want to remind folks that Hubble was in our very first undercurrents, talking about how they wanted one of the pioneers of fractional offices. A lot of the times people in the US were telling us that they can't do fractional offices because the operational overhead didn't work with how their system was working. So their expansion into the US, I'm just predicting we're going to see much more fractional office usage in the US due to this move. I'm going to give it back to you. And you also heard it here first. I don't think you've announced the Hubble expansion anywhere else.
No,
so you heard it on the tweet. Let's go for it.
I agree with you. I think that's something that doesn't exist. It's something that in exploring the market in New York specifically for this launch this summer, we've talked about. And they've said that's something we cannot do. We'll see whether the appetite is there. We'll see whether the operating system works. But it's something that we definitely want to test because it's done so well in which is somewhat the most mature co-working market. So the last theme that we really want to build towards from a product perspective is prospect and member self-service. So if there is something that reasonably should be able to be done by one of your prospects or members, we want to enable them to do it in the most intuitive way possible. And I think this speaks to our investment in a network of avenues to get into space. They all serve a different purpose. How does a corporate customer get into your space? How does a agnostic retail consumer get into your space? How does someone who's specifically used to a traditional leasing process and looking for a suite get into your space? One thing cannot do them all, but we want to create roads to your spaces for all of those different customers. And they should be able to do that as much on their own terms as possible. And technology can help up to a point. So we want to build that pathway, and that's going to be coming through our member apps, websites, and our operating platform. So I think across those 4 themes is really where we're building. It's exciting. We know it's really important to our customers. Hopefully it brings us closer to a lot of the other technology leaders in this space who are doing really cool things.
I love that. And I think it's really interesting that you've got these 4 categories. Thank you so much for sharing them. I think it's the first time I've heard of them outside of the company, or at least in a public forum. So definitely appreciate you sharing that, and congrats again on the expansion of Hubble to New York. My question for you is, you're doing a lot of good for these operators, but you have mentioned several times that this is for your customers. Are any of these benefits going to be translatable to folks who are maybe not using Yardi Cube or other Yardi software?
Yeah, absolutely. And they are today. Like I mentioned, we have our kind of 3 tenants, our operating platform, our accounting. Those are the customers for obvious reasons. But our top of funnel solutions, we want to make them as accessible as possible. Someone working today with just a retail consumer going to deskpass.com or listing your space for marketing amplification through Co-working Cafe, those things are free. And we hope that they will always continue to be complementary. The kind of point of reference I would make is we don't want someone to have to pay to list a private suite with Yardi when they're doing that today with LoopNet. It doesn't really work for the operating model, given the margins for co-working. So we truly believe that should be a complementary benefit to other services that we provide and accessible to non-customers.
That's great. And I'm glad to hear Yardi has definitely been more vocal over the last, I would say, 12-ish months about this idea of being a good collaborator, a good citizen, as opposed to just coming in and throwing its weight around. So definitely like to hear the fact that this is open to operators using any software or no software. There are still folks that I know who have their rent roll on a whiteboard in an office in their building. That is how they run their business. All right. But they still are listed with all these platforms and have manual processes around them. Now, there is an elephant in the room, and I only bring it up because my inbox this morning exploded at around 4 or 5 a.m. So just before the email newsletter landed, a lot of the broker community in the UK were a little bit up in arms in the fact that Justin, one of your leaders out in the UK market, said something on stage at Flexa that it's about time that operators remove brokers from the middle of the transaction. Now, obviously, a lot of the hype or the anger, I'm going to put that in inverted commas, was more about confused brokers who obviously work with WeWork, who Yardi owns, work with Common Desk, who WeWork owns, work with a whole bunch of the same operators that you're working with and your customers on the software side. How do you address that? What do you have to say about this sudden uproar?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big topic that I'm never going to be able to answer adequately, but I think where it comes down to is there is a portion of the market where the customer is not getting the service that they need to interact with space. And that tells me that if there is a broker involved in that process and the customer is not getting what they need, then maybe disintermediation is a good thing. And for that, small suites where a broker doesn't see the economic incentive to go do 10 site tours, that should be an e-commerce, online, self-service process that's perhaps assisted by technology or the operators themselves. So at that end of the market, absolutely. And I think there's an unmet customer need there. And that's very timely that we bring this up with my mentioning of the launch of Hubble, who is one of the biggest broker partners in the UK. So I think it really comes down to the nuance of what are we talking about? Like at the top end, do we think that we can meaningfully get corporates engaged in flexible real estate without working hand in hand with their tenant rep brokers? No, absolutely not. Like, we do not have anywhere near enough corporate engagement with flexible product. And to do that, we need to work into their portfolio and workplace plans in a meaningful way that means working with their brokers. They play a critical role as an extension of their real estate org. So I think it's nuanced, right? Like, part of it, yes, it is ripe for tech disintermediation. Does that change the bulk of where brokers' revenue comes from that's interacting with flexible space? I don't think so yet. And I hope that what we see over time is that we can actually do more transaction in the ignored part of the market and then give those tools to brokers to be able to have a full portfolio view for their customers. So that's the direction I would like to go. But I understand the reticence of brokers to bring technology that's not native to their organization into this space. But I hope that gives some clarity to Justin's comment. And I know he's a very good friend to the brokerage community in the UK. There we go. Now we know he's not a bot.
Sorry about that. So I think you hit it on the head. There is that unserved market, and it's a kind of frustrating part of the market. Brokers don't like doing it. As you said, commissions are low. Operate like members are feeling, am I getting the space that's right for my business, or am I getting the one that's the highest commission paying to the broker, or the best kind of perks? Maybe they're trying to win a trip to Hawaii, or are they really serving my interests? And so we've definitely seen this come up in the newsletter quite often. And I'm not going to say all brokers are like that. There are those who take the time and they love those small deals. They nurture them. They turn the 3 desk requirement into a 100 desk requirement over the lifetime of a client. So it can definitely see that. And I agree with you that there is this play. We're seeing obviously Managed, Valve, a few others building software, Office Hub, for the broker community to try and facilitate those on-demand quick bookings to try and fix that gap in the unit economics, right? So completely agree with you, everything you said there. Now, I am looking at our timer. We are around kind of 10-ish minutes in, and we're still geeking around about tech. But I'm going to ask folks to bear with us for 1 minute. There's another tech story this week that I want to get your feedback on. And that is that Airbnb is essentially having a midlife crisis, right? Yeah. I'm not saying Brian is their CEO, but I'm saying the company is. They're trying to figure out what happens next. And they've rolled out this suite of additional services, photographers, hairdressers, etc., thinking that this is the closest thing, because renting a house is a service, a hairdresser, a photographer, etc., is also a massage, is also a service. But they have this other part of their business that has been growing since the pandemic, and that is Airbnb for work. This is helping create day offices or day events, get-togethers, gatherings, events, that kind of thing for corporations. And so my thinking is, if they're going to go down this route of an everything app, which Uber's trying to do and X is trying to do, etc., do you think it's inevitable that we'll see space, whether it's co-working or other, booking for work inside Airbnb?
I think it's not a stretch to think that they will. I think at some stage, all of the participants in this market have said, I wish there was the Airbnb, using that term, for co-working. And I think a lot of what we're doing is building towards that native, accessible system. I think, what is different is all those services you mentioned up front there, they're all individual service providers. Really easy for them to pop up and provide their service to you. We know that there is a nuance to our industry, which is part of the big challenge, is getting people into space, getting people into an environment where they understand the nuance of the hospitality of that particular operator to drive loyalty and repeat business. Airbnb is, for lack of a better term, become a commodity product, despite the fact that the units that they sell are very unique. In that way, it does look a little bit like what we're doing in the co-working industry. So I don't think it's unreasonable. Are they going to be able to immediately get into all those segments that we talked about? Corporate customers, travel customers, retail customers? I don't think so. But I actually like to see them going in this direction, because more visibility on this being an add-on to other things that you do. Like, you're traveling to a city, maybe you also need a desk. I think a lot of us have talked about, why aren't we able to go book a co-working desk when I go on Concur and I get my flight and my hotel and my car and I now need my office? I think it's a point of maturation for for access to this, which is going to increase the size of the total booking pool and people coming into this product. So, net, you didn't ask, but I think it's a good thing. I think there will be multiple people playing in this space as there already are. And I think more visibility on it is good.
I completely agree. And going back to what you're saying around the whole data side, they need to get the inventory. They need to make sure it speaks to the systems that already exist. That's the reason why they didn't go straight into hotels, right? Well, they go into like boutique hotels, and that's still a disintegrated system on the most part. So I definitely think there's something there. We are seeing a lot of moves being made to create a kind of unified data layer across our industry. But that actually brings me to another news story this week. So I'm going to jump off of Airbnb and go over to this. Christy asked whether we should indeed have a rating system for indie co-working spaces. And it is a great idea that I've seen discussed numerous times. But in her post, she actually references something else that I think you would agree with me, is quite important. And it's not the rating, it's the terminology, the definition of what our units are that allow us to hit a higher level of scale. But to bring it back to you, Will, do you think we need a rating system like a Michelin star or a hotel rating system?
I don't know about a rating system per se. I think customer feedback, Google reviews, like we trust unfiltered feedback from people we've never and will never meet these days, like they're the gospel. So I think we're like very happy with that. And again, back to the Airbnb thing, right? Like you trust those reviews as if they were your family for some reason. But I think you hit it on the head that like what's needed is standardization and what is the product. Before you even get a rating on the product, what is this thing? Because I can't rate it unless I want to engage with it and understand what it is. And I think the most visceral example of that is, what is the difference between a co-working desk and a dedicated desk? Like, I know, I doubt that someone going online looking for somewhere to work today because they've dropped down in Omaha for a work trip knows what that is. And by the same token, someone who's searching for an office and might not have considered Flex before, and they see the ability to get a market-ready suite, a spec suite, a serviced office, I would have no idea to tell someone what the cost and what's included in those things are. I think it's a really interesting conversation. I actually think it's much more meaningful than it may sound. Standardization helps us market space. It helps the consumer interact with that. It helps us standardize and benchmark performance for this industry, which helps, I think, lift all boats. This was a very key point of discussion like yesterday at the Urban Land Institute, Flex Council in Denver, standardization of terminology so that we can tell our customers what we are selling and they understand what it is a critical part. And then beyond that, let's rate it. Whether that is to help people understand what boutique or niche space is, or whether it's just a rating and review system so that we can start to have levels of quality that align to price. I think those are the two steps that we need to go down to help commoditize and introduce more people to our product.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting topic. I'm glad you brought up the ULI and kind of what that discussion, that's been a discussion that's taken a couple of months and it's still ongoing. And it's going to be something we have to all agree on. Yep. But it also brings me to the question of who decides the terminology, right? An indie operator might call X, whereas a WeWork will call it a cabin. Or they may call it a cabin in India, but call it a private office in the US. Yep. And then you have even more complicated than that going back to the Airbnb super app, that's a complicated app to build Airbnb. But when it comes to co-working, a single resource is not a single product. So a single square, this box that I'm in right now, could be a private office. It could be a weekly office. It could be a fractional office. It could be a podcast studio. Yep. And all of these are being booked and used in different ways by different customers. I think that is like the golden kind of tripwire that trips up a lot of folks from outside this industry who come into this and like, we're going to build the Airbnb for co-working. Yeah. Because it's much more complicated. It's much more nuanced. And that's before we even go trust the gospel ratings online. Personally, I don't trust 5-star reviews. I go and I look for what is the 1-star reviews and what is the 3-star reviews. If the 1-star review is Debbie didn't treat me right and I'm never coming to eat her again, and by the way, you haven't paid alimony, I'm like, okay, this is probably a good restaurant if that's the only 1-star review, right? That's the way I have to think about it because I don't believe reviews anymore. And that comes down to, as we get more and more data thrown at us, How is that going to change? And forget even asking AI to do that. That's going to be a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah.
I talk about it a little bit in our last Undercurrents. If you're new to the podcast, head over to thisweekendcoworking.com and look at that Undercurrents about AI agents, when one day we're going to see someone's personal assistant booking space or a meeting room or a desk from a corporate AI assistant, and humans will never communicate, but the booking will be made and you will walk into the space, give a high five, and get to work. That future is rushing towards us, but how ratings are going to feed into that, and terminology and taxonomy, this is a technical challenge that no one has really solved yet, but I'm happy that the conversations are starting. So I'm going to jump over to another topic out of, I'm not sure where Jeremy is based these days, but he wrote a post around this idea of a platform operating system or platform operating systems in which landlords and office portfolio owners essentially simulate the VC model, where instead of just being a provider of space, they start amplifying support services for their customers, whether it's marketing, PR, crisis management, any array of things to help the members or the occupiers, for lack of a better term, stay in the ecosystem for longer. Now, this is something that obviously we've discussed a bit offline before we started, but what are your thoughts around this idea of creating these operating systems within physical buildings?
I think it's something that is top of mind for most of our large portfolio commercial customers today. And part of it is the really obvious part of connecting building and tenant operating systems so they can physically do basic tasks like book a room, pay their rent, access parking, etc. But I think it's going a step further, like the most forward thinking, which they're setting the tone for where the rest of the market will go over the next 10 years. They're starting to introduce flexible office solutions. They're starting to introduce co-working. They are doing managed agreements with managed service providers to introduce amenity activation and optimization. And as part of that comes services. They want to say, great, we want to bring this tenant into a flexible component of our building, but I don't want them to have to go and stand up their Wi-Fi network. If they need some kind of hospitality on top of that, we have a team that is trained to operate on their behalf, similar to how a phone or virtual service would work for a co-working customer, but at an enterprise level. This raft of services, I don't know how granular and cost intensive it's going to become, because at the end of the day, everyone's focused on margin. But the concept of services and having a platform operating system that goes much beyond physical space is hugely important right now. And which services are part of that platform operating system, I think we're going to see. There are some really forward thinking. If I'll call out one, for example, Tissue Inspire, who are a full stack developer and operator and run their own leasing from everywhere from one desk up to a full building in-house. They offer a suite of services to those customers far beyond the physical space to make sure that they understand and grow with that customer, both in their existing building as well as across the portfolio. So I think it's an interesting concept. It's working its way into a technology roadmap from our side as to how can we support that. But part of it involves physical service, hospitality, training, the experience when you come into a building. And I think that's somewhere where, frankly, the largest co-working brands, I'll mention ULI again, CBRE and Perry from Industrious came in and talked. And a lot of what they talked about was like, what is the hospitality service that they sell as part of the operating system that exists within a building? I think that's going to be a really critical part for how operators, and it may even be a service line for an operator, hospitality, how they sell themselves going forward and what role they play within the broader commercial ecosystem. I think it's one of the key learnings that co-working is going to start implementing on the broader market.
Very well said. And I'm glad that you brought up Tishman, because they're a fantastic example of kind of a fully owned campus or ecosystem where they can control the entire play. But I want to highlight another example out of Australia where Tashi Dorji from JLL shared recently on our podcast about this trend where operators who didn't want to bring that all in-house were partnering with kind of co-working operators for specific floors on the terms that their hospitality services, their concierge-like services, are then available to be paid for by the rest of the building. Yep. So whether it's drop-in, whether it's the additional auxiliary services, the kind of event planning, whatever it is that the space operates and offers, tying that into the agreement that they're making with the landlord to A, be a more compelling solution, and B, really drive up revenue, right? Revenue from the rest of the building, not just the 2 or 3 floors that they manage. I think that's going to be a really interesting kind of shift that we're seeing. Just on the topic of kind of Australia, I firmly believe that Australia is leading the market in many ways, but they don't really sing about it. It's very popular here in the US to beat our chest and kind of be like, oh yeah, we're doing these amazing things. But the Australians are pretty focused on just getting shit done and not about talking about it. And so as This Week in Coworking, we are doing kind of our first mini series into the Australian market, the first episode of which landed on Friday. So definitely go listen to that. If you're trying to understand what makes the Australian market tick, we have already planned a second series due to the popularity and the kind of caliber of guests we had on the first series. So very interested in kind of sharing more about the learnings, wins, and kind of innovations coming out of Australia. So definitely go and listen to that either on our website or wherever you're listening to this or watching this. On the topic of innovation and kind of product types, well, I want to make one more kind of question for you. I personally absolutely love it when we have what we call boomerang topics in the newsletter. This is a topic that maybe we've discussed a few times. Someone makes a move, then someone else somewhere in the community responds to that news, and then it becomes like a debate that's decentralized, that's happening on different channels, but is all from folks who are reading and sharing links into the newsletter. That happened this week. Last week, I shared an article from a space in Glasgow who closed their virtual office services, quoting that it became no longer profitable to provide them. Sophia Stolberg from Piloto 151 and Piloto Mail completely disagreed, dived straight on, instead of writing a post, jumped straight onto a video and talked about how it's actually one of the most profitable SKUs in co-working. And she would know, she not only runs Piloto Mail, but 40% of her revenue at Piloto 151 comes from providing these kind of services. Yeah. So my question for you, Will, is given the scale and reach of your management platforms, your marketplaces, what is your thoughts on virtual offices? Are they a good product SKU for co-working spaces or not?
Before I jump into that, I love the shouting out Australia and I love the boomerang reference. So this is the podcast for me. But virtual offices, I think that some of the most profitable and successful co-working operators that we work with are successfully integrating virtual office programs into their offering. That said, we have definitely worked with and continue to work with a number of people who've tried it and walked away. And I think that comes down to the fact that it is a very different business from co-working. The service, the technology, the skill set required to be successful at it is all very different. Some people have figured it out and have started to optimize it. Sophia does a great job, and she's also doing a really good job at marketing it. I will say that the VAST network, specifically the people at Intelligent Office, have done a fantastic job at this. And I think they're going to have some exciting news in this space in the coming month or two. But I think, look, we all know that physical real estate is a limited margin business. I don't mean to say that it's low. I mean that the variability of how good and how high margins can get is capped. So I think co-working operators are now becoming synonymous with mailbox services, phone services, virtual office services. And I think it behooves all of them to take advantage of those tangential services, which are potentially much higher margin. But the caveat being that there are a number of people and there are a number of service providers in this space that help them do that at an effective and attractive margin. And it's very easy to get distracted by how sexy it can look, but not think about the fact that it is a completely new operating system and skill set. So I would say the opportunity there is huge. And I have yet to see locations who do it successfully from an operational perspective, even tap their potential market. The ones that do it well are like, we want more. We would do this all day if we could. But I would say that they should learn from those in the market, people like Sophia, who are doing it well to successfully from day one, lest they be burned.
Yeah, I think you used the right word when you first started speaking about this, and that was they integrate it into their business. It's not something they just switch on and be like, this is an auxiliary side jam. It goes back to kind of that operating system. It has to work with how your team is working. If you only staffed by one person, and then you have someone who's getting 100 mailboxes every day or 100 packages, that's going to overwhelm your systems immediately, especially if you haven't set up an infrastructure to charge them for storage, to efficiently build them, to make sure that if that does scale and you now have 1,000 mailboxes, are you invoicing everybody for every time the mail item is scanned? Are you leaving money on the table? Are you forgetting to renew? Is someone not getting the email because it's a secondary payment platform that asks them to pay for their mailroom compared to their inbox, that their invoice for everything else on the space? So it's definitely a tech side, an operational side. If you've ever heard me speak at any event, I'm a very big advocate for the operating stack and shifting away from just thinking of technology and people, but bringing them together so that they work together to drive up what we call great revenue as opposed to really expensive or shitty revenue, right? Yeah. Both revenues are good, but we've seen operators literally losing 50 cents on the dollar every time they sold a specific unit. And that just comes down to the fact that it's just not operationally efficient because it was sexy, everyone's doing it, they threw it in without thinking about how it works with everything else, and their business suffered, their reputation suffered, their profits suffered. And I completely agree that it's a huge untapped opportunity. And like folks just don't really realize how many people are shifting towards some form of self-employment. And the first thing you do when you create a self-employed business, if you register it for tax or liability reasons, is you have to start giving your address into a forum that is a public database. Many people who are coming into this for the first time are really quickly realizing how much spam and risk there is listing their home address under their business. And so those two curves, I think, are going to just piggyback each other. And so I completely agree with you and Sophia and the folks over at iPostal One who are all sharing that this is a very profitable business model, business line. You've just got to do it right.
100%.
Cool. So I'm going to run through just some other headlines. If you are listening in, head over to thisweekincoworking.com, click on week 20 to hear everything we've discussed so far. Read those links, get some more information, but also take a close look at this shift from GA Consult where they're seeing secondhand spaces becoming a huge opportunity, taking over pre-fit spaces. Go look over at what's happening in London where we're seeing this huge hospitality arms race. Once again, talking about the operating stack and everything else we talked about, we're seeing people differentiate on kind of the value add. Everyone offers a desk and Wi-Fi. You need to offer more. And just some final headlines to read us out. Craig over at Creative Density shared that they have officially merged with Thrive. You heard it on the podcast first. WeWork Brazil have reported profitability again. The European Co-working Day was yesterday. They hit their highest number with 240 co-working spaces running free co-working days in 28 countries across the continent. So fantastic to see that. Obviously, go back and read, listen, or watch the undercurrents about AI agents. It's a really good deep dive into what are they, how do they work, who's implementing them, and what are the challenges that they've faced implementing this new level of technology. And finally, we saw that Preferred and the team there have tapped Syncaroo. Full disclosure, I am a co-founder at Syncaroo, but they've tapped us to come in and help retool their entire stack so that they are ready for what comes next. Will, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us. Thank you for being a sponsor and supporter of the industry. Anything you want to share before we hop out for the week?
No, I think we've covered a lot here. Thank you for everything that you do. I think getting the news out there quickly, having a standardized message is something that's super important. So thanks for what you do. Always happy to be on, and we'll keep working together.
Amazing. Take care, everybody. We'll be back in your podcast feed probably on Monday with another insightful drop, but the weekly recap will be back on Friday. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Cheers.